Okay, welcome to the April session of the Chicago Computer Society's Linux SIG meeting. Tonight I've got a bunch of videos, lots of them you'll only see maybe a little bit. Will have a handout like I usually do. And the beginning is about things like for beginners, so you'll have to bear with it. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and I alluded to it in a special message, some people hear about and want to try and do dual booting, which means you got one computer, one drive, usually with Windows on it, and you do want to install a Linux to try it out, see what it's like on that system. And I say that's the wrong approach. There are other better approaches. One is to pick up a used machine at a garage sale, a yard sale. Try your local Goodwill. You may find computers there that might try and find the best one and get that. Also, you have external drives that people can use. I use them heavily, and you just plug them into a USB port. And some of my machines only have USB 2 ports. They don't have USB 3, and they run perfectly fine. Three ways of doing it. One is like this. This is a 2.5-inch SATA drive. This is a plug-on adapter by Sabrent. And it allows you to attach a 2.5-inch drive. You plug it into a USB port. You have to look up your computer's keys for bringing up the boot menu. And if you bring up the boot menu, you should be able to discern this particular drive because it'll start off with a name of Sabrent. Then you can install a Linux distro on that from a flash drive. You download, say, Mint as an example, and you can install it on there. Now, one of my videos that I'm going to be showing puts it out there as what's called a blob. Windows and Mac OS go out as a blob. That means you have one main partition for the operating system, your programs, and your data. If something goes wrong and you don't have backups of your data, at least, you're screwed, period. Because you're going to probably lose everything on there unless you're real lucky. Now, in that instance, what is better with Linux is to make a separate partition where your programs and data reside while your operating system and its utilities reside on another partition. If your system starts going south, odds are you can reinstall that Linux in just the one operating system partition, and it will suddenly recognize your home partition, which contains your programs and your data, and you're back in business. Two of us here have done that. Another way of doing it is this is a similar kind of 2.5-inch SSD drive. I bought a separate housing, which comes with the cable and the housing. I put the drive inside, and it can do the same basic thing the first one does. And if you're more modern, that's okay too. This is an M.2 drive housing I bought. I had an M.2 drive and I put it in there and I can boot up off of that. It doesn't matter on some of these if it's Windows or Linux. The only way you do the Mac would be what's called a Hackintosh. I don't recommend it. There are lots of potential problems with Hackintoshes, and you are pretty much on your own unless you have contact with other people doing the same thing, and you might be able to help each other out. So those are the main things, and I'm wondering before we get going, is there any problems, issues, or things that we should know about? Gee, don't everybody jump on at the same time. All right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my browser. Well,
ever tried Linux but you want to? Now is a great time to get into it. Linux is becoming a more commonplace operating system for your everyday user, and it's easier than ever to try out and install. Now, I'm not going to be the guy who tells you that Linux is the overall perfect solution for your day-to-day computing uses, because I don't know what your day-to-day computer situation is. If you want an operating system that is very secure, Linux is great for that. Now, I'm not going to tell you that viruses don't exist on the Linux platform, because it has happened, but it is extremely rare that a Linux system gets hit with any virus. If you have an older system, something that's like 10 years old, and you're ready to chuck it because it's running slow and becoming nearly unusable, before you do that, try installing Linux and see how it runs. You'll be very surprised at how much faster the system will operate. Linux is open source, and therefore most distributions of Linux are free. There's also a ton of community support for Linux in this day and age. If you've run into a problem with your installation of Linux, or you can't get something to work quite right, chances are somebody else has run into that exact same problem, and there's an answer to that solution somewhere on the internet. It's just a Google search away. Also, Linux respects your privacy. Most of these distributions are not going to be collecting any data on you to sell to third parties. Another great thing about Linux is that you get a choice in your software. There are a ton of distributions, a ton of different flavors of Linux. I'm sure you can find one that works for you, and it's not going to force you into an update that you don't want. Now, Linux may not be your total solution. If you want things to work in a way that you're familiar with and you don't want to get over that learning curve, Linux may not be the OS for you. But if you're willing to put in the time and see how something different works, you may find that Linux is a great solution. Now, I'm not saying that Linux is a perfect solution for every job out there. I personally am a video editor, so I use Windows on a day-to-day basis to edit videos. I found that Linux just doesn't work for me for that. But in other areas, the backbone server on my network, for example, is running Ubuntu, which is a great operating system. It's bulletproof. I basically turn it on, leave it alone, and it does its thing. Very low maintenance, and it's awesome for that. If you are wanting to try Linux for the first time, there are a couple of different distributions that I recommend. All of these distributions are Ubuntu based. The reason that I recommend Ubuntu as your base operating system to try out Linux for the first time is because there's a ton of community support for Ubuntu. Also, the most distributions that have the most support are Ubuntu based. Linux Mint, for example, is the Cadillac of Linux operating systems. It has all of the whistles and bells built right into the OS, so you don't have to go hunting for anything, you don't have to go looking for any extra software packages. Everything that you could possibly want, for the most part, is already built into Linux Mint. But for the most part, all of the terminal commands that work in Ubuntu should also work in Linux Mint. So if you get a little adventurous and you want to try out a tutorial that has terminal commands, those same commands that work in Ubuntu should also work in Mint. The operating system that we're going to try out in this tutorial is Zorin OS. I feel that for most Windows users, Zorin is going to have that familiar layout and everything should be in about the same place that a Windows user is used to. Now, I'm sure other people are going to make their recommendations for which distribution you should use, and they're going to put it in the comments section and tell me that I'm wrong. Don't listen to them. Listen to me, and only me, ever. Regardless of which distribution you choose and which one you feel is right for you, the installation process is basically the same. And I'm going to meet you over at my computer, and we're going to get into how to do that right now. Alright guys, so I'm going to show you how to make a bootable USB installer now, and no matter what project you're working on, these steps should be basically the same for making an OS installation USB. I also have a guide on how to make a multi-boot USB installer if you would be interested in that, but for the purpose of this video I'm going to assume that you only need to make one single operating system installation USB, so that's what we're going to do here. If you want to make a USB stick with multi-boot capability, check out my video on the Ultimate USB Toolkit. Okay, so there are a few different methods that you can use to install the Linux ISO that you want to install. The installation process is basically the same for everything. It's up to you to choose which distribution you want to use, but in this example, I'm going to use Zorin OS and I want to download Zorin Lite. So I've gone to ZorinOS.com, I've clicked on Lite, and here's the download button for that. I'm going to skip to download. It's a 64-bit computer that I'm installing this on, so I'm going to download 64-bit. It's not as simple as just clicking on this ISO. We need something to flash that ISO to a USB drive and make that USB drive bootable. For that, in this example, I'm going to use Rufus. So head over to rufus.ie, scroll down to the download section, and in this instance, it's Rufus 3.10. I'm going to click on that to download it. Once the ISO is finished downloading, you should see that in your downloads location, wherever that may be. And we've also got the Rufus 3.10 exe here. At this point, plug a blank USB stick into your computer. It doesn't have to be blank, but this process is going to overwrite all of the data on that stick. So if there's anything on that stick that you want to back up, make sure you do that before you do this process. Open the rufus.exe and you should see this. Now up here, you're going to select your USB drive that you want to overwrite. The one that I want to overwrite is indeed drive F. Here you're going to select disk or ISO image. Here we're going to select that ISO that we downloaded. In this case, Zorin OS. We're going to leave everything else as default here and hit start. And here it's giving us that final warning that everything on this USB stick is going to be erased. If you're ready to proceed, hit OK. This next part takes a few minutes. Just hang out and wait. And this is what it looks like when the process has completed. Just hit close and you're ready to use this USB stick as an installer. Now I'm going to use that USB stick that we just created to install the operating system to a computer. The first thing we do is plug that USB drive into the computer that we want to install the fresh operating system onto. So what I need to do now is boot from the USB install drive that we just made. To do this on my machine, when I power on, I have to repeatedly tap F9. That gets me to my boot device menu. Your boot device menu may be tied to a different key. Commonly, it's the escape key, delete, F12, or it could be something else. That's something you'll need to find out for your particular machine. But here we go. I'm going to power this up. I'm going to start tapping F9. And here's my boot menu. So I'm going to choose USB device. I'm going to select try or install Zorin OS. Now it's going to go through a process where it loads the OS from the USB stick. So now the Zorin OS has booted and we can look at this before we install it. But as you can see, this will be a very familiar layout as far as finding everything if you're used to the Windows operating system. So basically, we can go around and explore and see what we...
I'm pausing this for a moment because you're only seeing a portion of the screen and I don't know exactly what's going on. But I can't seem to correct what the problem is.
Think of the operating system before we perform any kind of installation. I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to get right to the install. Okay, so to install Zorin OS, we come up here and right in the corner, up on the left corner, we've got this installation package right here. So we're going to double click that. And most of this is just read the step, do the step, get the banana. It's going to prompt you every step along the way. So this is my language of choice. Most of these are going to be by default for me. Keyboard layout for me, again, is English US. We have the option of downloading updates while installing. I'm going to just go ahead and leave that checked by default. I'm going to install the third-party graphics software, and I'm going to check this just because I don't want to participate in the census. So here it's detected that I have a hard drive in the machine. I've already formatted the hard drive and thrown it in here. If you haven't formatted a hard drive and you have an operating system on this, basically if you choose this option right here, it's going to erase everything on your hard drive and install the OS to that. That's what I want in this instance. We have the option of password protecting and encrypting the installation. I'm not going to do that. We can set up LVM to do snapshots of the installation. I'm not going to bother with that either. If you would want to do something like a dual boot scenario, something like that, you can do that in here. That's a little more complex, and we're not going to get into that. I'm just going to go with this first option here, leave the rest of these unchecked, and click Install Now. I'm going to hit Continue. This is where you choose your time zone. You click on the map. I am indeed in the New York time zone, so I'm going to hit Continue. This is more fill in the blank stuff. I'm going to require a password to log in. That's up to you how you want to do this. This setup that I have right here is more secure. Alright, so when the installation finishes up, we'll see this screen right here. We have the option to continue testing and running off of the USB stick, or we can hit Restart Now, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to restart this system, and at this point you want to remove the USB stick. And as we can see here, we've got an installation of Zorin OS. I'm going to enter my password, and the big difference we see right away is that installer package that was up in the left corner is now gone. So what you'll notice right away is that this is a very familiar looking kind of layout here. Basically you come down here to the lower left corner and you'll see that it's got shortcuts to all of your various places that you would need to get on your computer. If you need to install new software, this is your software center. Think of it as like the Microsoft Store, and this is a very easy way to go through and install new software that you may want to use. In addition to this, you can also type things that you're looking for down here. To access the Linux terminal, it's Control-Alt-T. And here you can type in your commands. I believe this is the same as Ubuntu. So, yeah, so basically it's the same commands that you would use in Ubuntu, basically to get things done. So anything that would work on Ubuntu, I would imagine, would work here in Zorin as well through the terminal. But that's a tutorial for another day. That's deeper stuff. We're not going to get into that now. We're going to basically just look at this as an operating system from day-to-day use. For your software, basically you can go through and you can see what you want in here. You can go through the different tabs and see what's available. For example, you can find probably Office in here, Open Office or Libre. Yeah, here's LibreOffice files down here that you can get. You can browse through different games. So this is Firefox booting for the first time. That took a little bit longer to boot than what I would be happy with. Let's try that again. To be fair, this is a 12-year-old machine. A lot of people who are just making the change to Linux from Windows are probably Google Chrome users. I'm not going to condemn or condone Chrome. I'm just going to show how to install it on Linux. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but it is not in the software store. So you can go to Chrome's webpage, click on Download Chrome. We're going to get the 64-bit.deb package. Accept and install. We're going to open it after it finishes downloading, and we're going to run what? Okay. It's taken a second. We're going to install this. We have to authenticate with the password that we set up. Okay, so now it looks like it should be installed. I'm going to close this out. And if we go to our Internet tab over here, we see that we have Google Chrome. I'm going to see if it opens any faster than Firefox did. Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm liking the performance over Firefox already. And we should be able to drag an item. Yeah, there we go. So now we've got Chrome on our, essentially on our taskbar down here. They're really taking a page out of Windows Playbook on how to lay out an operating system here. This is the software store down here, just like a fresh installation of Windows. And this would be your file explorer and anything else that you may need. But this video is running pretty long already, so I'm going to get out of your hair. This is something that I'll let you install and you can play with on your own and check out and see what you can do with it. It is pretty snappy as far as it's a nice balance between a snappy operating system and a good looking operating system. So I think that if you give this a shot, you won't be disappointed. So I hope you found something useful in this video. If you did, consider hitting that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps my channel grow. That's it for now, and I'll see you next time.
Okay. All right. Now I want to make a couple comments. One, he's doing Zorin, which is a runner-up to Linux Mint for most people. But at the same time, too, he brought up putting Chrome on. If you don't like the invasion of Google knowing everything you're doing through the Chrome browser, try Chromium, and that's in what he called the store, software store. Just bring it up, look for Chromium, and install it. And it's almost the same thing, but it doesn't have all the Google features that eavesdrop on your privacy. Another thing on this one here, since the video was not displaying correctly because this system is overloaded with all the videos I've got, always come down below the video and see the More button, click it, and you get more information from whoever made this video. Then always go down and look at the comments. There is 686 comments. Now, a lot of them are probably garbage, but I find periodically a nugget of good information in these comments that you otherwise would not know about, or you would have to know and go find yourself. So it's always worth going through this stuff. Now, hey, it came back. All right, I'm gonna kill that video, which gives me a little resources back. Then I'm gonna try and put these others to sleep. That gets me some more back. I'm going to see if I can enlarge.
So back when I started this channel, 12 years ago now, for those of you who are counting, I had this idea that I wanted to create a resource of videos to help new users, especially as they were switching from other proprietary operating systems, Windows and Mac, to use Linux and open source stuff, to showcase alternatives, as it were. And one of the key things that I've realized in these last 12 years or so is that there are so many things that I know now I wish I knew back then, and chances are there that you have plenty of those as well. So today's video is about combining my ideas and you, the viewer, your ideas into the 10 best practices that we all wish we knew when we first started using Linux. So maybe you've just installed Linux, maybe you are thinking about it. Here's some tips, some best practices, some good ideas before you take the plunge. Let's get into it. All right, so these are a combination of my own thoughts as well as the comments left by the kind YouTube community and also those on Twitter about what they think the best practices are when using Linux and first starting out, what we wish we knew. So first of all, number one, pick a mainstream distro. This is something that comes as a recommendation that plenty of other Linux people on YouTube will happily tell you. When you first start out, you want to pick something that has lots of support available for it. So some of the big ones like Ubuntu and Fedora are great places to start, or Linux Mint, Zorin. Honestly, the list of recommendations could go on, but pick a mainstream distro and then try and shape it to what your muscle memory already knows. What I mean by that is, like, how do you usually use your computer? What do you usually use it for? Try and target those problems first. Change it to the way that you already know how to work to some degree, and then you will learn the bits and pieces of what you don't know. Number two, and this one comes courtesy of UKPRL on YouTube, and his recommendation, which I definitely validate, is create a separate home partition. Now you might not get this the first time you install Linux, but if you create a separate /home partition, what you're effectively doing is separating your personal data from the partition of the hard drive, the section of the hard drive where your operating system lives. So should anything go wrong, you can always obliterate this section of the hard drive while all your personal stuff remains intact. What happens if that happens? Well, we'll get back to that very shortly. But creating a separate home partition is good practice, and it also makes backing up and taking incremental images of your personal data just that little bit easier. So create your own home partition. Number three, make sure that you enable a firewall. Funnily enough, this doesn't usually come enabled as standard on most big distributions. However, most big distributions have a firewall installed. It's there, it's sitting there, it's available, but it's just not turned on by default. And it's just the smallest thing that you can do to protect yourself online. And enabling the firewall is as simple as opening your desktop, starting to type firewall into whatever menu you have on your distro, entering into the firewall configuration, hitting the toggle to turn it on, and then saying deny incoming connections. That is the incredibly simple version. There will be more recommendations for helpful things to do about firewalls down below and many other places in the internet. But firewall, make sure you turn it on, please. Number four, use a VPN. Honestly, if you are thinking about making the switch from Windows or Mac, then chances are you are concerned somewhat about the amount of data that gets mined from you, the end user, from proprietary systems, be they Windows, Mac, Android, or otherwise. A VPN is honestly one of the best ways that you can protect yourself online, and also just open up a bunch of other possibilities, alternatives when it comes to what you can do online. Now, if you're going to enable a VPN, you better enable a good one, and that's where our sponsor NordVPN comes in. Now, most of you are tech savvy enough to not need me to sing the praises of how important a good VPN is, but NordVPN is seriously one of the fastest VPNs that you can get your hands on today. Like, they have approaching 6,000 servers in 59 different countries. So no matter where you are on planet Earth, you can get a secure internet connection that is able to mask your true location and identity on the global internet. And I think that is a really underrated tool to be able to use. Now, not only that, like, you get a bunch of fantastic tech working behind this stuff to make your internet connection great, but also when it comes to like the small things, like, I don't know, not getting your credit card data sifted at a public Wi-Fi connection, or I don't know, enjoying the childhood TV shows that you grew up with and you might want to show your little kids, except it's only available to stream in the UK and in the US. I'm sure you can't think of any possible examples. The reboot, by the way, I think is pretty underrated. And with really simple apps that you can literally go download and install on any platform, including Linux and whatever phone you happen to be using, you can load it up on up to 6 devices and get your entire internet situation sorted. Now you, the Infinitely Galactic viewer, get access to a stonkingly great NordVPN deal in the description box below, or you can go to www.nordvpn.com/infinitelygalactic. It's probably easy to click the link because that's a mouthful. And you're going to get a great price on a 2-year plan, and you're going to get 4 months free just chucked in. And it's entirely risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. But honestly, once you taste the convenience of NordVPN and the opportunities and peace of mind it brings, chances are you're probably not going to look back. So, link in the description, check it out, and thanks to NordVPN for the ongoing support of this channel. Number 5, backup. Shout out to Alvaro Z and the other M for their explanations and recommendations here, but all of us wish somebody told us the importance of backing up, especially when you're starting out in Linux. And there's a few different ways or things you need to be aware of with backing up as well. You need to be able to back up the system, like with Timeshift or Snapper or the BTRFS file system, and you can look around for how to do that. Timeshift is the easiest, so figure that one out first. And also your personal stuff. And I mean, cloud storage can be great here. Also, the Ubuntu's built-in backup tool, or Deja Dupe if you're looking for it on other software stores, are great starts to back up your own personal data. But get a solid backup regime in place, because at some point something's going to go wrong, whether it's your fault or not. And yeah, you don't want to lose stuff. Number 6, try and centralize where you're getting your software from. Because it's Linux, there are 5 billion ways of installing software on your distro, but try and keep it all under the one system and try and figure out something that's relatively secure. So, where possible, stick to native packages in your distro's repository. Where that fails, move on to sandboxed package formats, things like Flatpak and Snap. Beyond that, move on to third-party debs or third-party repositories. And beyond that, if you're really stuck, which I don't see why you would be at this point, but then result to your random runtime files and stuff like that. But honestly, those top 3 should be your priority. And there's a bunch of reasons for this, but security is the main one. You don't want to be grabbing random software from random places on the internet. It's just not good practice. Number 7, the terminal is your friend. It's probably one of the most intimidating parts of learning Linux, is feeling like you have to learn how to use the terminal. Well, the truth is nowadays you really don't, but you should, because it's better. At least that's what we all came to realize a few weeks, months, years into this thing. And a few notes on this. First of all, try to learn your distro's package management commands on the command line first. Usually these are pretty easy to get your head around, whether that is through apt or DNF or pacman or whatever it is. Learning those commands is a great gateway to be able to understand how commands, broadly speaking, work. Also, don't copy and paste commands from random posts on the internet. Bad practice. First, make sure that you type them out and do a bit of research as to what those basic commands seem to be doing. Because you don't just want to slap something that then downloads something to your computer and makes a mess of things. So, do your research, type those commands in yourself. You'll be learning plenty in the process. Number 8, once you have your distro sorted, leave it alone. Seriously, it's tempting, very tempting, to be constantly hosing your system, reinstalling when there's something greener on the horizon. Because unfortunately with Linux, there just is always new stuff on the horizon. But here's my recommendation. I would suggest that, like we suggested back in number 2, where you have a separate home partition, if your hard drive is big enough, or if you only have one drive, you can split it up into 2 bits. Have like your work distro, where you set it, forget it, you set it up the way you like it and leave it alone. And then you can have kind of like your experimentation distro, or you could just use virtual machines. That's good too. But whatever you do, once you get things working just the way you like it, don't go and blow it all up. It's tempting, I know, just try not to. Number 9, we're kind of getting deep in the weeds here, but setting up fonts in your system that can help with document compatibility is actually one of those really underrated things that is really going to help. when somebody sends you a Word document and it's just full of Calibri font, it's going to end up looking whack when you compare the formatting with when you open it up in LibreOffice, for example. And this can be one of those things that leads to people just immediately saying LibreOffice sucks, when really it's just the fonts are incompatible. So shout out to Zorin OS, because of the fact they're working on bringing in fonts that are metric compatible. There's some suggestions here on the screen of some of the fonts that can be good drop-in replacements for some of the trickier Microsoft fonts to replicate. And you can see the compatibility here maps a whole lot better with Microsoft Office documents than ones that are just available by default in the distro. So definitely go and install the MS Core fonts for all of those boring ones like Times New Roman and Arial, and then go and get those metric compatible fonts. It'll make your compatibility situation so much better. And shout out to Meher Fadness for that suggestion. And number 10, final concluding thoughts here. First of all, Agent Smith recommends don't expect everything to work, and no truer advice could ever be said about open source software in general, but especially when you're getting started in the Linux world. Also, Roadrunner backs it up with saying don't quit if you can't figure it out in the first 5 minutes. Be patient, learn some things, Google some stuff. And from me, don't forget to enjoy the process. Have some fun with this thing. You have almost total control over it. You can make it do whatever you want. So welcome to the world of opportunity and alternatives. 10 things that we wish we all knew when we started using Linux. See you all in the next one.
Any comments from anybody on what this guy seems to think?
Well, one thing I would like to say is I like most of his ideas. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. Once in a while, you'll run into a problem where you really don't want to type out some of the command line code that you find in a help forum. As long as you trust the forum and the person posting, then you can save yourself a lot of typos and syntax errors by just copying and pasting the block of command code. Usually they'll go line by line, command by command. And so if something doesn't seem to be doing what it's supposed to, you can usually back out.
Well, in some cases, I agree with you on that. But what he's, I think, attempting to wrap around people's mind is there are the man pages in Linux. Yes, they are geeky. There are other resources out on the internet in which you can check out the command and its parameters. And in some cases, those lines of code that you're copying may be multiple commands that the first one executes and feeds the second one, and the second one feeds the third one. And if you don't know what each one of them is doing and the options that are being given, you could have picked up a block of code that somebody put out there that's malicious in nature, could even blow away your entire system. And then you got to restore backups or install from scratch. So
again, I said using reputable forums.
Yes, I understand that, but still, some bad people get into the reputable forums.
I've never seen it happen.
Well, I'm just saying it can happen.
It depends on the forum, but the forums I use, I have never seen a moderation failure.
Okay.
But in any event, the other thing I would like to say is very often when you have an issue in Linux, it's because some configuration file or another is not correctly set up for your system, your hardware, or maybe in some cases for your software. There, you may actually want to go into the files and edit them. And this often has to be done as root if they're system files. And like with the sound issue you were having, if it really were a Linux sound issue, you might have to go into a part of the system called Pulse Audio, or a newer part of the system, which is called Pipewire, and figure out, are these conflicting? Is there something missing? I found that happened in my Linux Mint. It's Linux Mint Cinnamon is beginning to upgrade from Pulse Audio to Pipewire. And Pipewire has some files that have not been set up to acknowledge that Pulse Audio is still in use. And so you have to reactivate some aspects of Pulse Audio, and that means you have to add just the right line in just the right place. And it has to be done as administrator or root. And there are instructions for this online, and when you start seeing the same instructions showing up multiple places, you can be pretty sure they're the right instructions.
Well, the only thing, since this is geared at the moment for newbies, I would try and refrain from having to edit stuff on your own. That's where you may need help from other people in forums or community groups like ours in order to try and figure out the best course of action in getting it done, possibly by remoting into your computer to try and fix it so that there's less chance of you messing up your system.
Yeah, again, for a beginner, you're right. You should have somebody more experienced advise you as to exactly how this is going to work, or maybe even have them do it remotely.
Right. Okay, I'm going to continue on from here because it's already pretty late.
Welcome back. So today what I want to do is I want to walk through a couple of the tweaks and some of my favorite things that I've found tweaking the Linux Mint desktop over the last year or so. If you subscribe to the channel, and even if you're not, some of you may have seen this video that I published recently about why Linux Mint is probably the best Linux distribution for the average desktop user. And over the last year or so, I've discovered some things that have really made this work for me personally. Maybe these will be helpful for you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Linux Mint already by default looks fairly decent, but there are a few small things that I've done to tweak the desktop to my liking, and I want to do this by way of recommending a few extensions in the Cinnamon desktop. I want to talk about a couple of tweaks that I make in terms of layout and appearance. I want to talk about a couple of apps that I've come across that smooths the experience out a little bit as well. And let me know in the comments what suggestions you have for getting the most out of your Cinnamon desktop. So, number one, fonts. When it comes to fonts, the default Linux Mint font is the Ubuntu font. Now, for me personally, I don't mind the Ubuntu font, but I really got used to seeing the Inter font. So you can see here, these are the fonts that I use. I'm basically just using a 10-point Inter font, but I've cranked up the scaling to 1.2, and I've also made sure that the font hinting is on full and not on slight as it is by default. Your mileage is going to vary here, but it is worth mentioning that Inter, the font, doesn't come as standard install with Linux Mint, so you do have to go into the software manager and look up the Inter fonts. The good thing is that it is in the repositories, so it is a very easy one-click install from the software center, and then you can roll it out here for your desktop. Now for me, I guess I'm getting old and I sit away from the monitor a bit. I've got a 15-inch laptop display, so at 1080p resolution, it's beneficial for me to crank that font scaling up a little bit. And to me, this actually satisfies the need of scaling in general. Although Cinnamon does have scaling, it's not as dialed in as GNOME and KDE, but you can achieve mostly the same effect by A, cranking up the scaling of the fonts, and B, increasing the size of the icons in the taskbar, which is my next tweak. So in order to achieve this particular panel, you right-click on the panel, go to Panel Settings, and then customize the panel height. Now for me, I've gone up to 48 because that's kind of the next click where the icons kind of clear up a bit. What you're going to notice is if you have an irregular panel size height, you'll end up with a panel that's tall but icons that are really small, whereas if you scale it up to 48, then the icons jump up a size. Once we're at 48, I feel like this is more easy to see, and there's a little more spacing between the icons and it feels a little less claustrophobic. But you can also then customize the size of these little guys over in the system tray using the left, center, and right zone symbolic icon size. And again, you can scale those up or down depending on how big or small you want them. To me, this kind of solves a lot of the issues around between these two things, both the text font scaling and these like basic interface tweaks. It helps alleviate a little bit of the claustrophobia without having to go full display scaling. Now, on my particular display, because it's only 1080p, I only get the difference between 100 and 200% scaling, and I don't get any other options there. Let me know if I'm fairly confident that if you have a higher pixel count display, you get more options here in terms of fractional scaling, but I also could be wrong with that. So if you've got a high resolution display, in the comments, let me know. The next one I wanted to talk about very quickly was transparency, because some of you might notice, and some of you did notice, that the taskbar by default here is transparent. This leads me to the extensions part of the video, where Cinnamon does have in their catalog quite a few little helpful extensions that you can download from within the system settings. You can see I've got a few enabled here by default. There's transparent panels. It is worth mentioning that there's another transparent panel mode here that's characterized as reloaded, and I think the only difference is that you can customize the color of the transparency, I think, whereas transparent panels just does what it says on the tin. When you maximize a window, it no longer makes it transparent, so you don't get a weird, unpredictable color of your taskbar. The other one that I like to add is G tile, which basically gives you options to use a more sophisticated tiling window manager with keyboard shortcuts like you see on the screen here. And this works in conjunction with, or not at the expense of, your usual drag to the corners of the window for quadrant tiling and full screen tiling that Cinnamon has had for some time. So for those times where you're really trying to get organized and have windows automatically snap to a particular grid layout, it is very, very helpful to be able to use this tiling window manager to create whatever kind of layout you want. Think of it like Windows 11's tiling layouts, but kind of on steroids. And many people in the Linux world appreciate and love the tiling window managers that are standalone and the ones that are built into things like Pop! OS's Cosmic Desktop. So it's just a fantastic, regularly updated extension that ranks very highly in the Cinnamon desktop extensions list. Finally, the Cinnamon dynamic wallpaper is one that was new to me with Cinnamon or with Linux Mint 21.1, I think. This is one that I've only recently become aware of, but it is a fantastic little tool that helps you create those kind of nice, superficial, but kind of nice dynamic wallpapers that change throughout the day. Not only does it help you configure your own set of images, it also understands the dynamic images that are standard for the Apple macOS wallpapers. So if you really like what Apple does with their dynamic wallpapers, you can actually go and get those same files, and this extension will understand those files and let you use it. But also, they also come with just a set of images that are all kind of this sort of fairly flat 2D artwork kind of style of different landscapes that you can use and configure for whatever time of the day that it might be. Some of you might recognize these from other OSs. I think I'm definitely seeing some of these from macOS and some of these other ones from just around the internet. But the fact that it comes bundled with a few ones to try it out is really nice. And you can obviously configure what time of day things switch and all of that good stuff. So that brings me to Nala. Nala is basically an updated or an upgraded version of apt that you can install, and it helps you install stuff from the command line with more feedback, with a more logical layout, and also just a prettier and cleaner way of installing stuff from the command line. So a simple sudo apt install Nala is all you need to do to be able to get this piece of goodness, and then you use it essentially like you would with apt. So if there's a particular package that you're looking to install, let's say I wanted to install, I don't know, Inkscape. So I would go sudo Nala install Inkscape. Give it your root password, And what you're going to notice here is instead of having black and white, endless feed and scroll of texts, you can see we get a color-coded, nicely laid out layout of all of the packages that are going to change, the ones that are going to be removed or recommended to be removed. You hit yes for continuing, and instead of an endless scroll of text, you get a lovely clean progress bar and a little readout of everything that's going on. It just looks so much better. And the cherry on top is that it uses accelerated downloads or multi-threaded downloads so that your package downloads are typically faster with Nala. Now, what I should give a disclaimer here that it is possible, in theory, that you might have some discrepancies in package conflict resolution with Nala because it's not as robust as apt in theory. But in practice, and I've been using this for some time now, and I've seen other people recommend it and talk about it, I haven't come across that myself. I have had situations where it sometimes gets a little bold with the packages that it recommends to be removed, but I don't know if that's Nala's issue or if that's an apt issue overall. Most of the time, 9 times out of 10, if I'm installing something from the repositories, I'll do it through Nala. And if I'm wanting to install software that's on FlatHub, I will do it through the software manager because it seems to be the quickest way and prettiest way of getting things done. Finally, the last little recommendation I want to give you is in regards to Warpinator. Warpinator is a really great wireless transfer tool that can help you send files wirelessly around your local Wi-Fi connection. Very similar to how AirDrop works on the Mac and between phones and stuff. However, the kicker is that Warpinator, for all of its beauty and for all of its usefulness coming default on Linux Mint, it doesn't work particularly well with anything iOS related. So that means in order to be able to wirelessly transfer files, you're going to need to get something else. So this is where my other little recommendation for today's video comes in, and that's Local Send. Local Send is a fantastic little tool that is multi-platform. You can literally get it on every platform there is, including Mac, Linux, Windows, Android, and iOS, and it works flawlessly on all of these platforms. I believe it's either written in Flutter or something very close to it because it has really nice, smooth, mobile-first kind of animations, but it's been really solid. Like, I've used a lot of ad hoc peer-to-peer Wi-Fi wireless exchange file transfer tools over the years. This one takes the cake. And I don't know how long it's been around for, but my guess is not too long. But man, is it well loved by those who have found it. So can't recommend Local Send enough. Get it on all the devices that you own, and you will very quickly have the same level of user experience that people do in the Apple world. And I really feel like this helps round out the lack of ecosystem, or at least one simple problem of getting files between devices quickly and easily. So this is the default interface for Local Send, and basically there's either a receiving mode or a sending mode. If you want to send something, you can choose a file, folder, text, or just copy paste stuff, and it'll pick up whatever other device is on your network. So for example, I'll open up Local Send here on my iPhone, and you can see here that it brings up and it automatically code names them all, and you can set it up to have access pins and all that kind of thing, but by default it seems fairly simple and straightforward. You upload a file, you hand them back and forth, and the wireless transfer speeds seem really good. And I think that'll about do us. Fedora 39 has just come out, so let me know if you want me to dig into that in a coming video. I don't really have too much to say about it at the moment other than it's a GNOME release, and it is what it is.
Okay. Now I noticed that there is a real latency on the video, and there isn't much I can do about it. I hope the machine I'm on looks pretty good, so I'm hoping its video turns out real good. Now this one here is going to be something, and I'm not going to play all of it because it's 26 minutes long, and I've got more to go, so I'm going to only go through part of this.
So this Linux for Beginners is really to teach you how you stop coming to Linux installing a couple distributions, and then going right back to Windows or Mac or whatever you typically use for a daily driver. I use all of them, so there's nothing wrong with any operating system. It's just different strokes for different folks. And I will just say, I want to teach you how to make a Linux desktop look amazing and understand all the components. I'm going to walk through a couple images on the screen real fast, just so you get an idea of like Mint to a KDE style to a fully customized one like I personally use. And I've used a bunch of them differently. And I want to teach you the ways and the components, the things that you like and don't like about Linux to switch them out to all the things. That said, when it comes to what is a Linux beginner, I would say if you're not technically savvy to use Windows or Mac and have a pretty good understanding of those, Linux isn't for you. It's for technical people to really want to customize and make an amazing computing experience. Because I will say, with Windows and Mac, I'm pretty bored. I understand all the problems and limitations they have. With Linux, it's limitless. There's so much to do that I just fell in love with computing. And that's why I mainly used Linux for my daily driver, even though I edit videos on a Mac and I record on Windows for a variety of different reasons, mostly hardware compatibility and some of the stuff that I use. It just makes, use the right tool for the right job kind of thing. So that all said, let's get on the desktop, start installing Linux, and kind of walk you through all the different customization you can do. So for this, I have a little article on christitus.com, Linux for Beginners. We're going to go through the install using Linux Mint, but you can use any distribution. You don't have to use Mint. We're just going to use it as an example because it's a good starting point for a beginner. You just burn the download, the ISO that you get from Linux Mint or your distribution of choice using Balena Etcher, or if you're a Windows user, Rufus is probably my preferred one, but either one is good. And then we're going to go through some of the things you can change, where in Mac, you're stuck with Finder. In Windows, you're pretty much stuck with Explorer. You can add programs on top of it, but you can never really remove Explorer. In Linux, all that's different. So we'll go through all the different types of file managers, different theming options, depending on the desktop environments you have, remote access, terminals. All these things are really, really an integral part of just understanding what doors you can open for Linux. And then we'll go into some limitations and Windows app alternatives that you might do. So Adobe, just to exclude some folks right out of the gate, if you are using like a Creative Suite, Photoshop, Premiere, After Effects, all these are just no-goes in Linux. If you use these and you use them every day for your work, Linux is not for you. Likewise, if you're huge into like Microsoft Office and you use a lot of macros and really advanced features, maybe not. Now, this is not such a thing because of the development of Microsoft Office Online. G Suite is amazing. So I use a lot of my tools, Office tools, through the web browser these days, but Linux does have some other alternatives, albeit a little bit not as powerful, I would say, as the Microsoft alternative. And then finally, we'll touch on gaming, and that's just the overview. Check down below for timestamps. And we're going to start with downloading old Linux Mint right here. Click download, grab your ISO, stick it on a USB drive using Balena Etcher, which you can get here. This works on Mac, Windows, Linux, so whatever you're using, you can easily stick your USB drive like this right into your computer, flash that ISO, and we'll meet you right on the install screen. Okay, so we've booted into our install media. We'll just say start Linux Mint. This puts us in what's called a live environment. This is where we can kind of learn about it without destroying what's on the computer already. So if you have Windows, you can get in here and mess around. Try these things out I do in the videos and see if it's right for you. So that's what you do. So I say get familiar with Terminal. This is one of those things where if you're in Terminal, this is something every Linux user will do, whether it's installing a program like NeoFetch just so you can show off to your friends and look like an amazing hacker. It's just, there's so much to do in Terminal to make this even better. So terminal is probably the first thing, and there's so many different types of terminals. Figure out which one you like the best, which we'll go into. We have our files. How you actually browse a Linux install is really interesting. I did an entire video, but you don't necessarily have to watch that too long. Didn't watch of that. Is if we look at our title bar and we go to our root folder right here, this is like my computer in Windows. Just structured in an NIX type system. If you're a Mac user, you're like, oh yeah, Macs are just like this. Just a little different with like applications and some extended properties. But for Linux, everything's here. I'm not going to explain every folder because you really don't need to know too much other than USR does not stand for user. That's system resources. Root is the sudo or super user home directory. Home is where most of your files reside. You go to download something, it's usually the folder, the user, and then it sticks it in downloads. So that's the structure for most part. etc is our configuration files for the system. So usually if the program gets configured system-wide, it's in etc directory. Devices is basically what dev is. These are physical devices that you can reference through the dev folder. And then boot is usually where all your boot files are. Finally, bin is just a symlink. Same with sbin down here to all the programs in your system. So that's the actual folder structure, why it's like that. So if you're coming from Windows, this is probably the biggest shock to you because you're used to like C drive with like users and all this other stuff. Just know that for the most part, everything you know is going to reside in the home folder. I just wanted to explain those other folders outside of it just in case you need a reference point. In your home folder, anytime you configure a program, typically they will put it into something called .config. You'll notice you don't see the .config because the dot before it hides that folder. So this is where all your user configure files will actually go. So don't worry too much about that. That's the folder structure. Just know your home folders where all the goodness resides. Browse around in here, fool around with settings, all these things. This is like a control panel. Every desktop environment typically has like a system setting like this that you can take advantage of. Now, you don't necessarily need everything in your system settings. This is just a good way to do it without having a breakout terminal for everything. But everything in Linux is meant from server first, and then desktop stuff gets kind of added on. In Mac and in Windows, typically it's the other way around. So the user experience can be a little bit less stable in the Linux realm because of this. But just know that themes and all this stuff, you can do so much with this. You can download new themes. Let's change some of this, switch it out to like Adapto Modo, and you can switch all these settings so easily compared to many other operating systems. As you see, we've almost got like a completely new look in just a short amount of time, which is kind of amazing. But before we theme this out too much, we are just working off of our USB drive. If we reboot, any of these customizations are completely lost. So we're going to actually install Linux now. And this only takes about 2 minutes. It's actually a pretty easy install. You just do your language.
Because there was a previous install, I'm going to stop this one here. I remind you, you'll get a handout, and in the handout are all these resources. I want to add at this point the last couple of items on that handout list are how to install Microsoft fonts and Google fonts. And these will help you if you are working with other people on their systems and they are running Windows. If you open it up in a native Linux environment, it doesn't know what those fonts are from Microsoft or from many from Apple. And so the end result is what you're looking at kind of looks like garbage. And you think you've got a whole lot of work to do to make this thing look better. When reality is, if you had the same font loaded on Linux, that the other person used on their system, it would look probably much the same as it does on that other person's system. So I added those on there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly play several of these other remaining videos. One of the, for the newbies, there is in here a video. It's 6 hours long. It's a full course on how to learn Linux. I would try and view it through one time completely. It's going to be overwhelming, I'm sure, but you're not trying to memorize it when you're viewing it. Then go back and start going over it again in chunks and exercise in a Linux environment what they were teaching you. This is by repeating over and over again what you are doing is the only way we people learn how to remember things and have a more comfortable feeling doing what we want to do on the computers. This is one of at least 3 or 4 videos on open source programs that will work on Windows, Mac, and Linux to a high degree the same.
Ladies and gents, welcome back to the channel. Today could be possibly one of the crowning achievements of this channel. Infinitely Galactic has been around as a project for over 10 years, and the whole point of this channel has always been to showcase alternatives in technology and in open source software especially. Now, the beauty of open source software and what it has done for thousands, if not millions of people around the world is it's given them an opportunity to pursue a creative expression, to pursue all kinds of amazing things that you can do with a computer without being limited by finances, or being limited by access, or being limited by what kind of hardware you're running and how powerful it is. So you might be thinking of switching to Linux because you like the idea of everything on the computer being owned and being managed by you. You're not a product of advertising, you're not a product to the whims of a particular company. All your information is private. There's a lot of appeals. Now, Linux obviously is a king in the server space. It is gaining ground on the desktop, but the biggest problem that we always come across when anyone tries to switch to Linux is the programs that you run, the applications that you run. One of the goals of this channel is to try and help you with that switch. Now, what I'm going to show you today is over 25 apps that you need on your computer right now. And it doesn't matter if you run Windows, Mac, or Linux. The list of apps that I'm going to give you today represent some of the best that the open source software world can offer you. Now, for those of us who are already part of the open source world and we love our Linux and our open source apps, this will kind of be a tour through the Hall of Fame for a lot of the open source projects out there. So come along for the ride. I'm going to try and group these with the timestamps down below by what kind of category I'm talking about. These are the apps you need to install right now on your computer. Because once you have installed these apps, you will feel the gateway drug of open source software. And if you can switch your workflow over to these apps, chances are you're not too far away from installing Linux. All right, let's jump into it. So, where do we even begin? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's 2021, and so we can't go any further without mentioning the web browser. The web browser of choice needs to be Firefox. And while there are plenty of other alternatives out there that are both free and open source, I think Firefox offers the most features, cross-platform syncing, the richest add-on ecosystem, and upholding privacy is one of their main goals. So Firefox, go and get it no matter which platform you're on. Let's talk about email. Emailing is something that all of us still have to do, and a lot of us are still doing it through a web browser because we use Gmail or Outlook or something like that. Well, can I encourage you, if you want desktop level features akin to what you can find on Outlook, for example, then you need to go and check out MailSpring. Now, MailSpring, a lot of people in the open source bubble that I live in were under the impression that MailSpring was a dead project. But I can confirm that they actually had a release only about 2 weeks ago from the time of the recording of this video. The open source development of MailSpring marches on. Now, I will preface it by saying this, that true open source purists will know that the MailSpring email engine itself is not entirely free and open source. In that, the mail, in order to activate some of the features that this email program offers, goes through a particular mail server. Now, if you're not comfortable with that, don't you worry, I have an alternative for you. But what this allows is some of the best email features that I have seen on desktop email, period. Mac, Linux, Windows. Go and check out MailSpring and download it. Thunderbird is your backup, in that Thunderbird has been around for a long, long time, and it will hopefully be around for a long, long time to come. And it has pretty much every feature that you can imagine under the sun, whether it's encryption, whether it is calendar integration, all of those things can be done in Thunderbird. The reason that it's not my prime pick is that it's not as modern and it doesn't look as nice as something like MailSpring. So for me personally, I do prefer to use MailSpring, but at the moment I am.
Okay, I'm going to stop this one for the time being because of time. And I'm going to go on to the next one. Now, this one here is also open source software video.
It's your open source advocate, and I'm back with another video, and today I'm going to talk about what...
Hang on a minute, I'm having a video problem. This system's been overtaxed. Okay, now we go.
I'm currently using in the open source world. I make this video about once a year. It's not always a year, sometimes a year and a half, sometimes a little less, but I felt like this was a good time. I've done a lot of videos over the last few years. I know you guys have watched a ton of my videos, and you may be interested in what do I actually keep running after I show it to you, and what am I currently running. So first of all, foremost, I guess the best open source project that I use is Firefox. It's a great browser. I love it. They really went through some changes about 5 or 6 years ago where they just sped things up, where they made it so much more just incredibly efficient on CPU, on processes. You know, Chrome is great. It does a few things that other browsers may not do. It's got a bunch of extensions, but it's kind of a pig when it comes to resources. So I don't use it for a lot of stuff. I'll say that their developer tools when I'm doing any kind of programming are generally a little bit better than what I get out of Firefox, but overall Firefox is my go-to. It's the one that I use for everything. So you'll see that I've got a ton of tabs open. I don't even worry about it because Firefox, again, is just so good with the CPU and the way that things work. So really Firefox would be my number one. Now, before we get to this dashboard, my next one would be Linux. I use Linux. It's open source. I love Linux. I try to use it on everything. I have it on my servers. I have it on my desktops. I have it on my kids' machines. I mean, it's just one of those things where I don't want to deal with Windows anymore. I have to deal with it for my regular day job, and that's plenty. That's more than what I really want to anyways. So I just try not to use it when it's after hours, weekends, things like that. I'll support people who do use Windows, but really for myself, it's just not something I like. I love Linux. It's come so far. I mean, I know people are very used to this is what you see in Linux, and we'll talk about this application in a minute. You know, the terminal, that's how you have to do things in Linux. That's not true. Now, if you're running a Linux server, it makes sense to do it here. And yes, it's not the clickety-clickety that people like, but there's some great front ends for Linux servers if you like the clickety-clickety as well. We can talk about that too. But For me, the desktop on Linux is just amazing. So, I mean, if I do this, you can see all of the things that I'm running. And I know Windows added this feature, you know, a couple years back with Windows 10, but this has been around in Linux and macOS forever, where you get this nice spread out of different things that you have open and you can pick them. Virtual desktops where you can switch between your different desktops and put more windows in different places, and tile management and all that kind of stuff. It's just amazing. And honestly, with Linux today, the settings that you get out of it, I mean, if I just go looking for my settings just all on its own, I mean, it's so easy. Right there, open up my settings, they come up. I've got all my settings here. It's all graphical. It's nothing where I'm having to go change config files anymore. You know, it's really just super easy, super straightforward. Set your theme, set your colors. I mean, all the things you're used to in a normal operating system, they're here. They're built into these really amazing desktop environments. And that's one of the things I like about Linux is you have a great level of choice when it comes to your desktop environment. With Windows, you're kind of stuck with Windows, and yeah, there's theming that's available, and there's some heavy applications that you can put onto it that'll give it a different look and feel, but honestly, they just add to the clutter and stuff that's already in Windows, so it doesn't make it better. macOS, you're really kind of stuck with what Apple wants you to use. I love macOS. I think it's a great experience, and I think they really go way above and beyond in trying to give you the most amazing experience that they can. But I do love the freedom of setting up a Linux machine that I like and changing the desktops. And if you watch my videos from way back all the way till now, you'll see that I've used like 4 or 5 different distros and desktops over the time. I mean, I've used Ubuntu Mate, I've used Kubuntu, I've used Pop! OS for a while. I'm using Ubuntu with GNOME on it right now. I mean, it's just, there's so many great choices, and I like to switch once in a while. I like to change things up and try something different and see how it goes. And you know, it's just such a really great, easy way to do things. But if you're one of those people who thinks that this is what Linux is still, don't fool yourself. Really and truly, this is not just the only thing that you get for Linux anymore. I mean, great. The terminal is amazing and it's powerful if you want to use it, but it's not a requirement to get into Linux and start using it and getting it to its fullest potential. They have so many amazing things. Everything can be done through the GUI. I mean, it's just up to you to use the terminal if you want to. So as we continued on, I do want to talk about the dashboard. Now, this is called Dashy. I did a video on this a couple years ago. I had been messing with some other dashboards. I'd messed with Homer, which was great. I liked it. It was fine. I messed with Heimdall a little bit, which was also fine. But when Dashy came along, I really liked what the developer had done. She just really went out of her way to give you a lot of really great ways to do different things. You've got all kinds of different control up here. You can make this thing look however you want. You can change it with a click of a button. I mean, it's just so simple to get it to kind of just lay out in different ways and do different things. And really, it's kind of up to you how you want things to look. So I really like it. It's just been a great dashboard for me, and I can lay out all the different things that I want to access really quickly. Plus, I get my weather and my time, which is awesome. I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers and all of my patrons over at Patreon. Seriously, you guys make this so worth it for me to do these videos every week. I really, truly enjoy it, and I just can't say thank you enough. If you're enjoying these videos, subscribe. Let YouTube know that I'm doing a good job by subscribing to the channel. Plus, you'll get notified when I have new videos coming out. And finally, if you're enjoying what I'm doing, give it a like. Just click on that thumbs up, and that way YouTube knows that you like it, and they'll pass it along to other people that might enjoy my content as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you again. Let's get started. So Metabase is really a terrific tool for doing reporting, and I've been using this for a long time. I did a video on this way early in the videos as well, but it still fits. It still works exactly the way that I said. My wife sells things on eBay and has been doing that for a few years, and we track all of her sales and things like that. And I pull that information down from eBay every month, and I have a little special program that I run to push that information over into this database and kind of get it formatted the right way. And then I just use Metabase to look at it and pull out different dashboards and stats so we can see, you know, how much money are we making, how much money are we spending on shipping and handling over time in the months, over time in the years, just different ways that we can do that. And then it's really easy to create these filters where I can say, how did we do in February of this year? And I can just go down and look and just click go. And actually, if I get February checked and then actually click add, you'll see there. So we can see exactly what we did in February, which is great. So yeah, I mean, it's a really awesome tool, and you can use it for so many things. And there's just really great documentation out there. And really, your imagination is the limit. It's not something where you have to know SQL. If you do, you can do a lot more stuff with it. But I mean, you can do a ton with it just by using the graphical click and drag user interface, which is what I've done with all of these things and kind of created this dashboard that we use. Metabase is
Okay, I'm going to stop there due to time. I also want to mention that this has quite a number of different recommendations. There is a part 2 also included, so you can go through that one as well. Okay. This one in particular is for Bob Primick, but some of you might look at it as what is possible when you've got more experience.
So first off, before we get into this, I have to say, installing Linux the right way is not for everybody. If you've never touched Linux, let's say you're not computer savvy, this is probably going to be a bit much for you. So for you users out there, I would recommend Linux Mint. Just go to linuxmint.com and click download and go through their install instructions. For those that have never seen or touched Linux, this is one way I'd probably recommend people get acquainted with it, because it comes with all these tools and all this stuff. But as someone that's used Linux professionally before even doing anything with the desktop, I gotta say, I don't like a lot of the stuff many distributions do. So for me, this is the wrong way. And when I have quotes, when I say the right way, this is the way I considered where I started to really fall in love with Linux, is being able to choose all this stuff. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be Debian. In my prior video, I talked about Debian, Arch, and Fedora. These are base distributions that so many distributions are based off of, that these are the perfect building blocks for the perfect distribution for you, because every distribution, the perfect one is really the one you make. And that's what I want to get into today, is building that right distribution. So let's get into installing. First order of business, Debian.org. This is going to be probably the best one to start with, just because it's so widely used. It's by far, Ubuntu's based on it, Pop! OS, Linux Mint, you name it. There's literally hundreds of distributions based on Debian. And Debian is the building blocks for most modern day Linux desktops. The first hurdle we have to touch with Debian is, this is where it gets a little weird. The downloading the operating system is probably the hardest part of this entire process. I kid you not. So here's how you download Debian. You're going to laugh. You click download. You don't want to download this one, and you don't want to download anything that they recommend, because it's run by neckbeards that don't really understand, and really, I don't think they actually want users to use vanilla Debian. So they don't include unofficial non-free stuff. So if you want to install an NVIDIA driver, for instance, that's just not going to work out of the box using their one. So we have to find these non-free firmware packages, and they bury them. So if you click on this link, this takes you to a whole long explanation. It's the wrong link, so come back here. So we're still on just the /download. Click unofficial, non-free. You get this file system one. And what I want to do is get you more on the bleeding edge, so you get a little bit newer packages, a better experience, in my opinion. So we want to come to weekly builds, not daily builds, but weekly builds. Click on that. Click on 64-bit, because you're probably on a 64-bit system. And then come into ISO CD, not any of these other ones. This is, I think, Blu-ray disc. This is DVD. Just the base CD will do it, because we're going to download as we install the latest and greatest. And then we're just going to grab firmware testing, not edu. Educational is not what you want. You just want firmware testing. Click this. It's about 600 megs. And this is how you download Debian. Silly. It's completely stupid. If someone from Debian.org watches this, put it in a spot where people could actually download the thing. You shouldn't need to do all this, but again, Debian people don't want you to use Debian. So after you download that ISO, I'd probably get on etcher.io or Balena.io and just download this. It has a Mac client, it has a Windows client, usually installs just fine. If you're on Windows, you could also use Rufus, but basically just create it, plug it. I've done a lot of videos explaining that whole process of creating the USB drive, but for this one, let's just pretend like I made the USB drive with that ISO using Etcher, and then let's get to the boot process. All right, and then we get to our loaded screen here on our computer. So you could do graphical install, but if you're using like NVIDIA card or something in your system, a lot of times this won't work. So I really recommend just doing the base install without graphics. I know that sounds a little scary, but you'll get to that logic. It basically takes out a lot of variables that can kind of trip you up. So we're going to click install. And then we just select our language, which is English, United States, and we'll just select American English at the top. It loads the basic components here, automatically configures our networking, and then we just simply name the system. And I'm just going to call this Debian-testing. Domain name, leave that blank. Root password, don't put anything here. Just hit enter. This disables the root account, which is recommended for security purposes. And then we type in our name, which will be Titus for the username, and then I'm just going to create a very simple password, and I'm Central Time. And now it says, okay, what do you want to do? Now this is where you will wipe out your disk. Right here it's formatting the disks. I'm just going to use the entire disk, which is just a simple virtual machine, but if you have any other partitioning, you'd do it manually here as well. So let's finish and write our changes. So now it's basically installing the base system. This will take some time. It will download all the latest packages as we do this. So the whole point of us doing it this way is we're not going to have these large downloads after we finish installing the system, because this was created literally yesterday from the Debian organization, which is great. So a lot of times when you're distro hopping, they make that distro ISO like 6 months or a year ago, and then you go to update it after install, and you're like, oh, I guess I got to wait another hour while it downloads, like 20 gigs of data from all the packages that were just installed now to be updated. So that's why we do it this way. And you can see right here as it's finishing up the base system, it's installing Linux Image 5.18, which is one of the latest. So that's why this is a very different install than many distributions. I think Ubuntu is on like 5.14. Same with like Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu. And a lot of their base stable packages are a little bit different in this one, where you're going to get you get a little closer to Arch, I should say, than your traditional install, which basically just means we're going to have a lot more up-to-date stuff. I can't emphasize that enough. Now we can configure the package manager. We're going to do scan for extra media. We're just going to say no extra media. I'm in the States. You can choose whatever archive mirror. If you're unsure, just choose the top one, Debian.org. I do know LeaseWeb has a Dallas-Fort Worth mirror, so since I'm in Dallas, I'm going to select this one. But for most people, you'd select the top one. We're about 5 minutes or so into this installation. Now I want to run through and give you some visual cues of what you're selecting here. Typically you always have this top one selected. This is just your desktop one, and the bottom one, standard system utilities, you also will have that selected. So now you have these things in between. This is the desktop environment. If you don't know what that is, check out my last video. I'm going to just show the desktop kind of what you'd see. It's obviously going to differ from what I'm about to show you, but I just want to prepare you. First off is GNOME. It looks like this. XFCE will probably look something like this. KDE looks like this. Absolutely love it. It's my personal favorite, KDE. Cinnamon is not going to look like this. Is actually what we're going to install today. We're going to mimic what Linux Mint kind of would look like, because Cinnamon's designed by the Linux Mint team. So we're going to install that today. Mate, which will look like this. LXDE, don't use that one. LXDE is like a depreciated desktop environment, and LXQT is its successor. So you would want LXQT. It's an active development, and it's still a very lightweight one. Out of everything you see here, LXQT will be the lightest weight. So if you're installing this on a potato, install LXQT. It's very reminiscent of what you see in like Lubuntu. And then those bottom two options are like web server and SSH. That's if you're doing like a web server or remoting into the system. So for this one, we're going to uncheck GNOME and select Cinnamon, emulating a Linux Mint install. Now this is going to take a while as it is downloading the most up-to-date version of that, which is, 1600 packages. So I do anticipate this taking close to 10 to 15 minutes, even though it's saying, oh yeah, there you go. It was saying 1 minute, but yeah, now an update, I was like, nah, that's not right. So yeah, give this a minute, walk away, grab a cup of coffee, and I'll see you here shortly. All right, so all the base packages were installed, and now we have our desktop environment, and you're presented Grub bootloader. This is just basically giving us a boot menu. We'll hit yes to this, and then usually you just select the drive that you're installing it to. In this instance, there's only one drive, so we're just selecting that. Once that's finished, you'll see a couple progress bars, and then we have finished the install. So we'll hit continue. This should reboot, and on reboot, we should have a working desktop. And here we are with our boot screen, automatically boot in. And this is going to look a lot like Linux Mint, but you'll notice it doesn't have as many packages as Linux Mint. And we also change up like the boot screen and things like that. So let's log in, and we're presented with all the stuff you would normally see in a full Linux Mint. Obviously, we're going to change a couple things, like obviously fixing the resolutions first. Go to our preferences and display. And then we can select like a 1080p should be good.
Okay, I'm going to stop that one there, and I'll mention that basically what he's describing would be creating a custom LMDE operating system. LMDE stands for Linux Mint Debian Edition. Current version is 6. So this is a way of creating from lesser amounts of add-ons that are in the official LMDE version, and having a stripped down version that's probably will run faster. You add to it what you want and need for your work environment. So I'm going to get out of that one for the time being. Since we're running out of time, we're already at 9 o'clock. So these, I'm going to just briefly mention what they are. This one here is interesting. Some of the 10 most likely problems you might run into on a Linux distro, and maybe how to get them fixed. That varies upon the problem and your knowledge. The next one is avoid these new user mistakes. These are things to try and not end up getting stuck with by knowing up front what to avoid doing. Worth looking at. Next one. Come on. Okay, this is part 2 of open source software that this person is actually using. It's a little bit lengthy. It's about 30 minutes each one of the 2 parts, but it has some good ideas, especially if you don't know what you might use in place of software you're running on Windows or on macOS. Next is optimizing. This one will give you a little bit of tips on optimizing Linux Mint for the casual type gamer that plays solitaire or some other low-end games. but some of these can get higher because there's a lot of stuff that is on streaming sites. Those do cost money, but if it's what you want to do, go for it. Next one is new Linux users. What when I first started with Linux, 10 things I wish I knew is basically what this one's about. Again, going over this one for newbies, you'll know some things to avoid doing. Next one is these have to reload because I had too low resources. This is the full course and it's 6 hours long. Watch it one time through, then go back and take it in chunks and actually exercise what you are supposed to be learning in that chunk. The more you do the stuff, the more comfortable you're going to feel in knowing how to do something. Next, and we're getting close to the end here. Now this one here, I wish somebody else had been here. This is what's on my home server, must-have services. It was made last year, but one of the other normal people who would attend the meeting might find this one of interest, and possibly a couple other people. So this one here is more advanced. It's not for the newbie. This is for more advanced users. Why doesn't my Wi-Fi work on Linux and how to fix it? I'll tell you up front, the biggest tip is either replace the Wi-Fi card with one that works with Linux, or B, use a USB dongle device for your Wi-Fi. Are the two main takeaways from this one here, but he has a few other tidbits as well. And the last one of the videos replace these with open source apps is another one that the one that he does that he does bring up that's shown here. This is Teams, but the impression I'm getting is this is not the full normal video conferencing Teams. This is the free version of Teams Chat. And he has a replacement for Teams Chat for those that would use Teams Chat. So those are the main takeaways. And at the moment, I have two other articles, like I said earlier, that will give you the ability to put on Microsoft or Google fonts in case you're collaborating with other people using something other than Linux. And I'll put this in the chat area. So I'm going to stop sharing and go over to chat. Come on. There it goes. Okay. And let's see here. Gotta find. There's that. Now, are there any comments on what I tried to get done tonight? I know it was too much, but
Seems I'm the only one left in the room.
I know.